accessed the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Welcome back, Green Lantern fans, to the podcast of OA. This is episode number 163, and I'm your host, Myron Rumsey, the keeper of the blog of OA, and I'm joined by my good friend, Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, welcome back to another episode.
Welcome back, man. I love it. This is great. I love doing the weekly ones. It's a good time, and it gives you and I a chance to just catch up, and give something else to the fans, or if we're still in this, whatever week it is. I know it's day 46 of quarantine, but this is great doing this every week, and I always look forward to each one.
Me too. This is good therapy.
It really is. I mean, it is kind of therapeutic now that you mention it.
But we got a good show lined up tonight. We've got an interview with a gentleman who is a member of our Facebook group, and I don't want to say his full name because I haven't talked to him yet to find out how he wants us to address him, so I'm not going to mention his name, but it's going to be a good segment. And then we're going to talk about a 6-issue story in the Kyle Rayner years that ran from Green Lantern number 100 through Green Lantern 106, and it was collected in a trade called Green Lantern Emerald Knights, not to be confused with the animated.
Right.
So it's interesting stuff. There's not a whole lot of comics news out there. There's a couple little things. There's you and I talked last episode about DC's publishing plans, and there seems to be a lot of fallout over it. People not getting the return calls from the new distributors to get comics this week at all, and people really lining up behind Diamond and saying we're not going to jump ship to anybody else. So it's going to be interesting. I know my local comic shop has no plans to open early before the Diamond stuff, and right now, in New York, they can't really open anyway. Even if they did curbside service, I don't think they would allow it to happen. How about Phil in your area? Are any of your comic shops buying the new books?
Not that I'm aware of. And we foreshadowed this was going to happen. It's just they had to know this was going to cause problems with the distribution phase of what they're trying to do. It's, I don't know. Apotheosis, as far as I know, they're still holding on to their stuff. They're not doing anything but just their everyday deliveries and everything on back issues and whatnot. But they're not ordering anything new. No, and I think they go with Diamond Distributor, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's what Martin told us last time he was on.
Right. I mean, they didn't really have any options till now, and I just don't think that people are as enthusiastic about being able to get their comics from someone else as they are just to get comics. I think they would rather be lined up behind Diamond. That's their loyalty, and they're going to stick with it. It's not a surprise, as you and I talked about last time. Right. Green Lantern news-wise, Jeff Johns put on his, he has a production company called Mad Ghost Productions, and on his website, he'd already had a listing for the Green Lantern Corps movie and mentioned it was going to be about Hal and John. And now he's got under the TV section, he's got it listed that Mad Ghost Productions is producing the Green Lantern series for HBO Max with Greg Berlanti's company. So it looks like he's set to maybe be co-producer, which is interesting. Who knows? We still don't know any details other than we know Sinestro's a part of it. That's about all we know right now.
Well, with Berlanti involved, it's going to be gold. I mean, it's going to be great. I have a feeling that whatever we've waited so long to get, I think it's going to be well worth the wait.
I hope so. The other thing that was interesting that it wasn't really announced, but I happened to read it somewhere. I don't remember exactly now where, but the contract that Warner Brothers Animation had to produce Lego movies ended in December. So there's a new one coming out that's Shazam, and I think they're allowed to release it because it was started before the contract ended. But that's likely the last of the Warner Brothers produced Lego animated films.
I think didn't Universal pick them up?
Yes, you are correct.
Well, that's a shame. That was a good, and the thing about the Legos, and I don't know if I don't know, did you grow up with Legos? Because I know I did. I've been around them my whole life.
Yeah, mine were made out of rocks and stuff, but no. We had Legos. It was, yeah.
It's such a popular toy, and, that's like marketing gold for them. Because if you've never noticed with Legos, they never go on sale. And they're always going up in price because of what they make and what they produce. But they're never on sale. They're never 40, 50% off. They're never on the bargain shelves or whatnot. I mean, that's Lego is like a top commodity for everybody.
And it's funny because I seem to remember watching a documentary about Lego at one, and it was a company that was on the verge of bankruptcy at one.
Right.
It's a neat story, but it's interesting to see how a company turns around on a property like that. But the Warner Brothers animation really kind of gave them a big shot in the arm when they started doing, the Lego movie and some of those other properties. I'm not sure whether Warner Brothers didn't go after the new contract or whether they lost out on the bid or what. There really aren't any details, but I don't think we're going to see any more of the DC superhero Lego films as we've been seeing.
The Lego Batman ones were amazing. I mean, they were really cool and they were funny and they were really liked. I don't know. It's a shame. I hate to see him lose that kind of contract. I don't know. It's disappointing. Lego's always been a popular one with me, and sadly, I won't have Clark to buy any kind of DC related Legos anymore.
Well, I don't know whether it's going to change the production of any of the Lego collectible sets, because this just ties to the animation and releasing movies. So
Okay.
let's hope that we still get to see some Lego DC sets. I'm assuming we're going to, because even though WB had the contract, they were pumping out Disney and Marvel sets like crazy. So
Yeah, that's true.
I don't think it's going to affect the merchandising. I mean, let's be really honest. Most of the time, it's Batman generated related sets to begin with. We're not getting a lot of Green Lantern or some of the other stuff out there. I know I've been dying to see like an Oa play set with a giant power battery, but
My God,
wouldn't that be great?
oh, that'd be amazing. That'd be amazing. Oh, yeah, you're right. It is kind of Batman centric. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, whatever.
It always is, isn't it? Darn that Batman.
It is.
Why does he have to be so popular?
I know, and it's really it's. I don't know. That's a whole other podcast you can get into. It's just so mind-boggling to me that he's the character that everybody has chosen to like get the most popular in the DC universe. But he has his following, so whatever.
It's true. It's very true. All right. Well, let's take a break, and when we get back, we will have a conversation for our "We Are the Core" segment, which I'm really looking.
Cool. Welcome back, Green Lantern fans, and welcome to your weekly Green Lantern Fun Fact. It's become an easy joke that you could defeat Green Lantern with a bottle of mustard. The character's weakness to anything yellow is well-established punchline, and deservedly so. It was a silly remnant of the Silver Age that was so miraculously redeemed when Jeff Johns revamped the character and his world in the 2000s, creating the emotional spectrum and establishing yellow as the light of fear. But the Golden Age Green Lantern's weakness would be a lot harder to legitimize. Alan Scott, who is not a member of the Green Lantern Corps and whose power originates from a different source, has virtually all the same abilities as the latter Green Lanterns. But his weakness wasn't yellow, it was wood. That's right, Alan Scott possessed an unimaginably powerful magic weapon that could conjure anything he could imagine, just as long as there wasn't a tree in his way. And there you have it, fans, your Green Lantern Fun Fact of the Week.
Listen up, Lanterns. It's time you took the oath with Green Lantern John Stewart. In brightest day, in blackest night, don't let the podcast of Oa escape your sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power. Green Lantern's light.
Welcome back to the podcast of Oa, and it's time for our favorite segment, You Are the Core. And Phil and I are joined by a longtime listener of the podcast of Oa and an active member of our wonderful Facebook community, and that's Brian Du Pont. Brian, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great. I love talking with you guys. So, and Phil, this is the first time I actually got to meet you. So,
Awesome. Looking forward to it, man.
So I have to tell a Brian Du Pont story before we start doing our interview questions. Back in the day when the emotional spectrum was growing and growing and growing, Bill and I were joking about it one episode, and we started to come up with names of other kinds of emotional spectrum pieces we could use. I think we went burnt sienna and seafoam. And Brian sent us T-shirts. He designed a seafoam lantern logo and sent us T-shirts of the Seafoam Lantern uniforms. It was great. It was absolutely great. And I got the biggest kick out of it. And then, Brian, you made, when Bill left the show and came back, you actually sent me a faux comic book cover of the podcast of Oa with us trying to decide between the burnt sienna or Seafoam Lantern Corps.
That's right. Yeah. That was good. I enjoyed making that, especially with the. I didn't have like a title in the front, like Bill is back, and I can't remember. But yeah,
I have that hanging in my Green Lantern shrine, next to a Neil Adams sketch. So you're next to Neil Adams on my wall.
You mean Neil Adams?
Woohoo!
So it was cool. That was the first and I think only fan mail we've gotten in the 9 years on the show. And Bill and I were working near each other, so we opened it up together, and it was the greatest thing. But,
cool. I think I was gonna say that I got to thank you guys actually, because when I started listening to the show, you were talking about how one of the neat things about the Green Lantern comics is this sense of imagination and how kid friendly it is, and what a wonderful toy a Green Lantern ring is. And that inspired me to order a couple of Green Lantern rings for my son and I. And like when that came in, we were out in the front yard like blast the Sinestro Corps, and we just had a great time. So that came from you. That was a great idea.
I've always felt that the Green Lantern Power Ring is something that you could give a child who's struggling with something, no matter what it might be, and it would be a source of confidence building. And so when the Power Ring started coming out, I'm like, oh, this is so great. And I started buying them, and I would carry them with me. And if I went out somewhere where I had a Green Lantern shirt on or whatever, and a kid recognized the logo, I would ask the parents if it was okay if I gave them a Power Ring. And I would tell them, whenever you're afraid of something, put this ring on and say the oath, and it'll help you get through it. And it was great. I loved it. I loved doing it.
Cool.
It's funny. It's like
really cool.
It's like a talisman. It's like I would have tried to teach my son Clark how to give him, instead of giving him a binky or giving him his like blanket, I'll give him a Green Lantern Power Ring. And
So Brian, how long have you been a Green Lantern fan?
So a newer fan. I started with Jeff Johns, and that happened because I wasn't even seeking it out. It came to me. It found me. I was signed on to this old website that you can trade like books, like novels, and you can put on like a wish list, and so I was just scrolling through any comics that were available, and Green Lantern was available, a hardcover, so I got that. It was actually The Blackest Night, and so that was kind of my first comic read of Green Lantern. I mean, I knew who Green Lantern was and all that, but that got me really interested into it. And I loved Hooked, and that was just before the movie came out. So I remember seeing the movie, and then after that was when I found you guys, because I think you started recording right after the movie.
That's correct. Our first episode was the review of the movie.
Yeah. So I was just like hungry for Green Lantern stuff. I was like, man, I got to know more about this. And I think Blackest Night isn't the best like introduction to Green Lantern, but it served its purpose. It got me hooked.
I don't know. I think it would be I think it'd be a good introduction. It gives you the full breadth of the whole Green Lantern mythos, all in a nutshell, especially with all the emotional spectrum involved. And then when you go back and reread, you kind of visit the fact that they didn't have all those creations back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you kind of jumped into the deep end of the pool.
I did. And you're right, Phil. Like going back and rereading, like I started picking up all the graphic novels before that, and you see that progression of, Rebirth and Secret Origin and all the Green Lantern mythos, and then the Yellow Lantern gets introduced, and then the I don't remember, Red, and then Orange and the Blue. Like that. It really.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only problem was I wasn't actually a DC. I hardly knew anything about DC, and so when I'm reading through The Blackest Night, all of a sudden there's a character there that's a zombie, and I was like, I don't even know who this guy is, so I'd have to go on Wikipedia and look up that character, and then like, oh, okay, and then you turn the page and then there's another character, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just drowning in it. I mean, it was good. I really, and I think my favorite part about The Blackest Night was was Barry Allen and how he became a Blue Lantern. Like, that was just amazing.
Yeah, it was cool. It had, I mean, I got a friend of mine. His name's Brian. I think he's on the last issue of Blackest Night. He just read the main 8 issues of it. When I read it, I did all 76 issues of crossovers and everything, and it was like gave me the full breadth of the whole DC universe in one nutshell of a big event. But Brian, he's on his last part of the Blackest Night story arc. I haven't really got his perception of it. I wanted him to finish it before I actually talk to him about it and get his take on it.
Yeah. You end up following up with like the Brightest Day after that?
No, really. Me personally, I did. We didn't do it on our podcast, but yeah, I did the Brightest Day.
Yeah.
It wasn't as good. It wasn't as. I mean, it was
Yeah.
still cool, but it wasn't as good as Blackest Night was. It didn't have that. It didn't have the oomph that Blackest Night did.
You could kind of tell that after Jeff Johns got over Blackest Night, that Brightest Day wasn't his idea. It was DC's idea of how can we take this popular series and get some more mileage out of it,
Right. That's kind of how it felt, getting more mileage out of it.
Yeah.
So,
I could definitely see that.
So, Brian, what would you, if you had to pick a writer, and I think you kind of answered this, past or present of any Green Lantern book, who would it be that interests you the most? Besides Jeff, you can.
Yeah, I'm not good with writers, so what hooks me into comics is art. But if I went with a writer, I have to go back to the Silver Age. I love the Silver Age comics. So you put me back with one of those guys, and I'm just happy. So
from an artist perspective, then what's your favorite artist?
Yeah.
Man, see, and that's really good too. Like Green Lantern artists.
Yeah.
I think I like Aaron Cooter. I think he's one of my favorites. He had a short stint on New Guardians, and I remember when he took over, it was such a shift from what the New Guardians was. It was a little rougher, a little heavier on the inks. And I think that was when Carol Ferris came out, and I thought that was just it was really cool. I really enjoyed looking at that, and I think you interviewed Aaron Cooter
Yes.
one time, didn't you?
We did Aaron Cooter's first ever interview. Aaron Cooter lived in Ithaca, which is about 25 miles from where I live. And Ithaca is where Cornell University is, and he lived there. And he was a struggling starting guy, and that New Guardians gig was really his first mainstream gig that he ever got. And he was appearing at a local, like we have these local fan run conventions, and he was there. And I actually got him to do a Larfleeze sketch on a Rise of the Third Army poster for me. But we did we ran his panel, and so Bill and I got to do his very first comic book interview back then. And now he's a big name guy for Marvel, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I think that interview was what really got me hooked into him, because I think at the time I was an art teacher, and I was starting to do some comics on my own, and when you talked to him, he was I think he was an electrician, or he was working in the trades. That's all I remember. And yeah, that was cool, because he was somebody said hey, you should submit your stuff, and he did, and he got hooked. And then I think that's what really I like hearing people start. They don't have the formal training, but they kind of work themselves into it, and that was really cool. I met him at Comic-Con in Chicago, and it was shortly after your interview, I think, and I had my sketchbook, and I was like, would you draw me something? And he's like, yeah. And he spent maybe 10 minutes, and we talked, and I thought he was just the nicest guy. That was really cool.
So is there any particular character that resonates the most for you?
Great. I've always been a Hal fan. That's kind of my guy. But I know Bill would kill me. But anytime Guy Gardner shows up, I think it's fun. He just brings something different, and that's what I love. Yeah.
It's a good choice, though.
Yeah. But I love Hal's. I love. I think I can't remember if it's Secret Origin or Rebirth. One of the two starts off with you tend not to be afraid of anything when you've already seen your greatest fear in front of you. And he's talking about his dad. And I thought that was a great opening. That got me hooked into him. And yeah, that's cool. It just makes you think, as a kid, he was he was kind of like a Green Lantern already. So
yeah, that's really cool. So do you read your books digitally, or do you get the hard copies from your local comic book shop?
I'm definitely a tactile guy. I got my comics in my hand. I like flipping through it. I like seeing like the spread. I like to see how one page interacts with the other page. But at the same time, I like how Comixology does that kind of guided move. I think that's really neat, and I think it's absolutely beautiful when it's on digital too. It's so clear and clean. So I kind of go back and forth. I'd rather still comic shop, just buy online. So
cool. We got time for one last question. So a lot of people have collections of things, either it's their comics or toys or whatever. Do you have a favorite Green Lantern item or issue?
Well, I gotta think about that. Hang on, man. I know we have. It's funny because the rings were the thing that we kind of collected, and mostly for my kids. And I know that they're floating around still, but. I think probably the Lego set. There was a Lego set that came out years ago with a Green Lantern jet, and it had a space Batman, because you got to throw Batman into anything. And then it had the Sinestro, and that's actually one of my favorite things that we got. That's cool. Green Lantern related.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Brian, we thank you for taking time out of your day and joining us and being a part of our core.
Hey, this was an honor. I really appreciate it. And I love You Are the Core segment. I think it's great getting to know all these fans that are in it, how they got into it and stuff like that. So it's really cool.
That's all Myron's idea. That's his brainchild.
Cool. Well, thanks again, Brian.
All right. Talk to you guys later.
What up, dweebs? This is Guy Gardner. You're listening to the podcast of OA.
So Brian's really kind of a neat guy. I'll have to put on the podcast listing on the blog of OA the picture of Bill and I in the Seafoam Lantern shirts and some of the artwork that he sent us along with that, because it was really fun. I enjoyed. At the time, it was, like I said, it was the only fan mail we've ever gotten, and to see someone go to the extent of designing a logo and the whole thing, that was really kind of cool. But anyway, we are back to talk retro review comics, and shocking, I'm sure it's going to be to everyone, I'm going to lead a review of a Kyle Rayner book.
I thought about that when you talked about doing this one. I was like, okay, hold on. I said I was going to take the reins to the Kyle Rayner stuff, and here we are doing back-to-back Kyle Rayner things, and you're taking the lead on another one. It's definitely changing times, that's for sure, man.
Well, but it is going to be a Kyle Rayner, Hal Jordan team up. So
it's fair.
So we're going to talk about a series of stories, a series of issues that were collected in a trade paperback called Greenland Knights. And I don't know if it's in print anymore or not. I know I've seen it on Amazon still, but I don't know if there's only limited quantities left or what. At any rate, we're going to talk about that storyline, and it encompasses issues 100 through 106 of the Ron Mars run of Green Lantern. And it also includes a few panels from Green Lantern 99, and I'll explain why in a minute. But this is kind of a milestone set of stories, because this Green Lantern number 100 is what kicks it off. And there's also some really neat symmetry to this, because in issue 50 of that run is when Hal becomes Parallax and Kyle gets the ring. And here we are 50 issues later, and Kyle and Hal are back together again, only not just as ships passing in the night, but as allies and enemies, which makes this really interesting as far as I'm concerned. But to kind of frame the story, right around this time, Kyle he was in the middle of a story where he got sent to the far future. And at the end of that story, Brainiac, he was in the future with the Legion of Superheroes and all that stuff. And the Brainiac was going to send him back to our time frame. And when it happened, he accidentally overshot the runway, and Kyle landed in the middle of a classic fight between Hal and Sinestro in issue 99. And that's how issue 99 ended, leading into issue 100. And what's interesting is that the Hal and Sinestro battle he falls into, Hal is wearing his original outfit, before the shoulders kind of came to the points where it was just kind of rounded. And He hadn't met Alan Scott yet, as we find out as the story progresses. So those shoulder designs, Gil Kane debuted that in Green Lantern number 35, and Hal met Alan Scott in issue 40. So that places this story prior to issue 35. So this is Hal from his earliest days as a Green Lantern. And ironically, he has fewer issues under his belt as a character than Kyle does. But they're about the same age.
Interesting.
So it makes it really interesting because you've got two characters who don't know each other, obviously, because Hal's being plucked out of time. Or, well, I should say Kyle's been inserted into a different period of time. But they're about the same age and about the same experience level, which is really kind of interesting. So what starts out in this is in issue 100, Kyle gets to experience some of the things that he hasn't gotten to experience in his run. You know, he gets to do things like fighting Sinestro. He gets to charge his ring at the central battery on Oa with the entire Green Lantern Corps. You know, so he gets this very, jaw-dropping moments, awe-inspiring moments. He even gets to see Ganthet back in the day, and he gets to see how micromanagey the Guardians were at the time.
Yeah, you kind of get the gist of that when you're reading through it, how he was so thankful when he got the ring and stuff like that. And he had a really good relationship with Ganthet, but going back here, it's like, okay, this is Kyle getting annoyed with their antics.
Yeah. Well, and Kyle's got the luxury of nobody's telling him what to do. And so he gets to see how the Green Lanterns had to answer these guys. And Kyle's put in this weird position because he's thrown into the fight. I mean, literally Hal and he collide. So he has to try to come up with a way to, how do I explain myself, And yeah, he doesn't know anything about charging his ring at the power battery or any of these things. He acts like it's his first time. And so he has to try to temper. How do I reveal? I can't reveal too much about the future because I can't let Hal know what happens. And throughout this issue, this was an oversized issue. Basically, Kyle rescues Hal from Sinestro. And you got to remember, Kyle's ring doesn't have the yellow weakness.
Right.
So he's able to do things against Sinestro that the rest of the Corps can't. And he tries to explain that he's got an experimental ring and so on. But what's interesting is when Kyle rescues Hal kind of admonishes him because he's like, Hal was basically being suspended. And basically Kyle catches Hal as he falls. And rather than him just cutting the rope and letting Hal fall and slightly get hurt in order to catch Sinestro, instead, he does the more human thing, which is what you would expect Kyle to do. He does that more human, compassionate thing, and he rescues Hal, but he lets Sinestro escape. And so Hal kind of goes into this thing about, I can take a fall. It's okay. It's more important to get the bad guy than to worry about me, which was kind of interesting. It's kind of that selflessness thing. Yeah. And as this issue unfolds, Hal and Kyle team up to take down Sinestro, and they swap rings. Hal gets to use a ring without the yellow weakness. There's an interesting part where Hal basically creates a gun construct, and he uses the gun construct to threaten Sinestro. He basically puts the gun into Sinestro's face, and he implies to Sinestro he could use it. And after the story is over with, when things are all said and done and Sinestro's being taken away in emerald chains, Hal makes this really interesting comment to Kyle. He goes, killing is not the sort of thing a hero does, which I thought was so ironic given what we know about what happens with Hal.
And it's funny because it's a foreshadowing because he doesn't know yet, considering that Kyle's in the prehistory of when that took place.
Yeah. Hal has no idea what his future holds yet. He's going to find out, but at this point he doesn't know. He just knows that Kyle's from the future, and it's good to know they're good hands. Blah 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 blah. And as Kyle's about to be sent back home by the Guardians because they don't want anything about the future to be revealed, and the Guardians somehow can use their mental energies to send Kyle forward in time, which I thought was kind of comical. But as this is about to happen, Sinestro pushes Hal into that teleportation ray that they create. And so Hal joins Kyle in the 90s. And that's how issue 100 ends, is with Hal back in continuity in the 1990s with Kyle.
And that's really, really kind of cool. It's it's interesting how it takes off.
Yeah, it's really kind of neat. So the next issue 101, is really a pure character-driven issue. In this issue, Kyle has to reveal to Hal what happens, because Hal's, of course, the first thing he wants to do is go to Coast City, and Coast City's not there. So Kyle reveals to Hal what his fate is. He recounts over several pages what happened, history as Kyle knows it and we know it. And what's really kind of neat about this, the artist in this issue is a guy named Jeff Johnson. And over these several pages, he's got the history taken at most of the page. And in the lower right-hand corner, you can see basically Kyle and Hal in silhouette. And the very first page, Hal and Kyle are both kind of standing tall, and there's two guys talking. And over the course of the next 4 pages, Hal goes from standing tall to being reduced to a man on his hands and knees, which I thought was really, really powerful.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. And it's neat, kind of like, I like how they just tell the history like in a short synopsis of what happened, And of course, I'm a big Cyborg Superman fan, so it's another iteration of Cyborg that I haven't seen in a long time. So, but it's really kind of neat how Kyle's the one explaining to Hal Jordan what took place and all the events that transpired that he was responsible for. And it really, really makes you take a really, really good look at yourself. If you're obviously never lived through this, you don't even know if it has happened or not,
Right. And Hal, of course, struggles with it, with what he's been told, and he kind of flies off to process things. He lashes out at Kyle a little bit because he doesn't have anywhere else to put his energy. And he flies off, and he ends up rescuing, and this is very tropey, he ends up rescuing a number of disabled kids in a bus that's stuck on some railroad tracks.
Which happened to be a yellow bus, by the way.
Yeah, it would be a yellow bus. He couldn't move off the tracks because his ring has still got the yellow. But the whole event kind of puts things in perspective for him. And he meets back up with Kyle. And Kyle's going to go take him to see the Justice League to deal with what Kyle believes is a time paradox, because what he's thinking is, well, if Hal's here, Hal couldn't become Parallax, and then I wouldn't have become Green Lantern. So how am I still here with a power ring, and why is Coast City still gone? Shouldn't have all this undone itself? The timeline's been changed. If he got his ring up to 88 miles an hour and got the 1.21 gigawatts and went to the future, the timeline's been changed, But in the meantime, Calabac is watching on, and Calabac in a previous issue lost a fight to Kyle. And so he wants to redeem himself in the eyes of Darkseid. So he decides to take it upon himself to go get a piece of Hal. And that's how issue 101 ends.
I love Calabac. I like how he's drawn there. He looks pissed.
Yeah, he's done really well there. And for character-driven issue 102 kind of shifts that around a bit. So issue 102, Kyle, before he takes Hal to see the Justice League, decides to go to Warriors. And you got to remember at the time, Guy Gardner is doing his Voldarian shtick, and he's got Warriors. And this is after Final Night, so John Stewart is walking again, and Alan Scott is back as Sentinel, looking rather young.
I'd have to say this is probably one of the best parts of this series, is with them meeting up at the beginning.
Yeah, I agree. I thought this was really kind of it's awkward because Hal goes there, and they all know him, and they all know his future, but this Hal has never met any of them, so it's really awkward for him to be in a Green Lantern flavored bar, and he sees a replica of the flight sim, a statue of himself with the gray hair and Kilowog and all this stuff. And he really kind of struggles with the awkwardness, and he decides he needs to go find out, is there a place for me in this timeline? Is there a place for me in the future? So he goes to Indiana, which is where Carol and Tom Kalmaku are rebuilding Ferris Air after the destruction of Coast City. And of course, the reunion is very emotional and heartfelt, and there's a little bit of humor in there. And, basically, Carol Ferris is trying to get Ferris Air going, and they're struggling to get their feet off the ground, and they really need a contract to get themselves going. And that's when Calabac decides to show up, and they have a big fight. And the fight takes up most of the issue. And it's probably, Hal at this stage of his career has never had a fight as ferocious as this one is. And it's a really neat fight scene. Ferris Air gets tore up pretty good, though. And it ends with the issue ends up with Hal feeling like, well, maybe this future needs me now more than it ever did. And that's where they kind of leave it. That ends issue 102. So jumping into 103, Hal visits the Watchtower and meets the current Justice League. And this is the Justice League. Let's see, Plastic Man is in it. Azrael is in the Justice League.
Orion's even in there.
Yeah, Orion's in there. This is the Aquaman with the beard and stuff and the one arm that's a hook. So it's definitely not the Justice League that Hal would go on to help found in his own timeline. His interactions with Aquaman are kind of fun. But they all kind of latch on to Hal and are like, oh, we want to invite you back to the League. And at one point, one of the characters invites Hal to sit in Kyle's chair because Kyle is the Green Lantern in this League. And Kyle really reacts poorly to it. He thinks he's been replaced. He and Wally have a little bit of an argument in the watchtower. And this is the watchtower, not the satellite, but the watchtower on the moon itself. And he heads back to Earth. He gets involved in trying to rescue people from a fire, and he has a tantrum in front of the police when they question him a little bit. And then this is when he's living with Jade. He gets into an argument with Jade, and he kind of throws a tantrum in front of Jade, and so he's kind of reacting.
He gets pissed off, man.
Yeah.
Coffee.
he acts kind of childish about it, and Batman shows up that night and kind of puts him in his place and says, Kyle, you're still the League's Green Lantern, and that Batman, who wasn't there to greet Hal, obviously knows Hal is back, and he basically told the Justice League to admit Hal so that they can keep an eye on him because Batman, of course, doesn't trust him.
Of course. I mean, Batman's shown in his typical fashion here.
So, issue 104, to me, is the oddest part of this story. They decided to do a crossover with Green Arrow, and at this point, Connor is the Green Arrow at this point. This is after Ollie is dead. And it's odd because this Hal hasn't met Oliver, but this issue is the second part of a crossover with Green Arrow number 136. So it feels a little jarring when you look at this overall story, but it's neat to see what feels very much like a classic Green Lantern Green Arrow team up with two characters who've never met and don't really have that dynamic in that way. And what they do is they tie Hal's pre-test pilot days. They explain how he became a test pilot from being in the Air Force and that he was piloting a plane which was being hijacked by someone who goes on to become the leader of the Eden Corps, which is the group of people that were ultimately responsible for Oliver Queen's death. And so this whole thing is about avenging Ollie, even though he's never met him before. But it's really kind of a neat story, but it really doesn't fit as well into the rest of this story. So it feels odd. I don't know whether you felt that or not.
Yeah, I did. To also note, I like Paul's art.
Yeah. The art in this entire, not every artist did it. Like Daryl Banks did issue 100, but I think there was almost a different artist on each one of these issues.
This is really, really cool looking stuff. No, you're right. I kind of felt disconnected with this. To me, they could have done without the focus on these two and done it in a singular issue.
Yeah. I don't know why they chose to do that. To me, they really broke up the flow of the story. But when issue 105 starts out, Kyle is confronted by a time-traveling Parallax. So this version of Parallax this is where you get a headache from time travel stories. This version of Parallax is a version of Parallax that went to the future and then came back and did his activities in 0 Hour. So he doesn't know that 0 Hour failed. He doesn't know that he sacrifices himself for Final Night. He doesn't know any of that stuff. But as he's coming back through the time stream, he senses Hal's presence in the 90s. And because he himself realizes the chance that there could be a paradox and that it might prevent him from becoming Parallax and doing what he's trying to do, he's stopped by the 1990s to grab Hal and take him home.
Probably one of the coolest versions of Parallax suit, too.
Yeah, it looks really neat. So he doesn't want the events of Emerald Twilight and all those things to be erased. So he and Kyle get into a little bit of a fight, and that takes them to the moon where Kyle is trying to protect Hal from encountering Parallax, because Parallax is, like I said, on his way there to get Hal. And so they have a fight on the moon, Kyle and Parallax. Parallax stands over the defeated Kyle, and the issue ends with Hal jumping into the fight. That leads us to the conclusion, which I thought was to me one of the strongest issues of the little story itself. And basically it has Hal and Parallax going at it, with the young Hal getting the better of his future self. But of course, Parallax has to hold back a little bit because he can't kill Hal. Right. That would be a problem. That would really force the paradox to happen. Yeah, so exactly. Parallax takes Hal on a little bit of a time trip, and he takes Hal back to the moments just before Coast City is destroyed. And he freezes it just before the explosion takes place so that Hal can see the terror on people's faces and see people that Hal supposedly had relationships for in Coast City that were people that were supposedly important to Hal, and to show him what he's trying to fix, what Parallax is trying to fix. And he's trying to get his younger self to understand why he did what he did ultimately. And the resulting fight between Hal and Parallax is really cool because, I mean, it's an epic battle between a person and their future self, which is really kind of cool. But it's as much of a war of words and ideology as it is a physical altercation. Mm-hmm. And as they're fighting, Kyle shows up and says, I've been trying to figure this paradox thing off, and it's right there in front of us. You both have to go back to where you belong in order for the timeline to be restored. And we're lucky that nothing has been changed yet. So he points...
Smart move on Kyle's part.
Exactly. He figures it out. And he points out to both of them that they've got to go back. And you see this... It's really kind of a neat moment because both versions of Hal make the right decision for different reasons. You've got Parallax Hal saying, I have to go back because what I now know about my own future is I'm going to sacrifice myself to save the Earth. And if I don't go back, I can't save everybody. The younger version of Hal decides the same thing and says, I'm afraid of going through this, but I'm not afraid to die. So I'm going to do it too. And so they both volunteer to go back despite what they know what their futures are going to be. And basically they're going to use Parallax's power to mind wipe so that neither Hal nor Parallax will remember any of this ever happened. Before Hal and Parallax leave, Hal gives Kyle a hug and shakes his hand. And what we don't know is happening at the moment is that Hal's ring had some different abilities than Kyle's ring, just as Kyle's ring has different abilities than Hal's. And Hal had the ability to make duplicate ring. So he duplicated his power ring and he slipped it to Kyle so that he can help grow the Green Lantern legacy. And it's a ring he ultimately gives to Jade when the story is all said and done. And the two of them go back to their relative spots, and Kyle then goes on with his life. And what I thought was really neat is one of the things that Kyle didn't have was the motivation for being a Green Lantern other than I have this ring and I'm naturally going to do good because that's my character. And what he got to see now is he firsthand got to witness what the Corps was like. And I think this is where he really gets the idea of, I have a legacy to uphold.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's all about that legacy thing.
Yeah, and he knows what was really lost now. And he also gets to see Hal in a different way because his only exposure to Hal up till now was Parallax. So he never got to see Hal, the real hero. So that was really cool. The thing that was interesting to me, and now, again, my frame of reference was, I'm obviously a big Hal guy, and I don't like Emerald Twilight. One of the criticisms that we had about Emerald Twilight was that Hal was not really, at the time of Emerald Twilight, Hal hadn't lived in Coast City for quite a while. And all the people who supposedly died in Coast City were people that were made up for the Emerald Twilight story. So readers didn't know who any of these people were. They were made up to make it look like there was some kind of profound loss for Hal.
Sure.
And there really wasn't. But here's a Hal who is less mature than the Hal who goes through Emerald Twilight. He not only sees Coast City destroyed, but he gets to see the moments when it was destroyed and the terror on people's faces and the horror. And then he finds out what his own fate is and how his best friends are dead. And he buckles and bows, but he never breaks.
Which is Hal's character.
Right, but it wasn't his character in Emerald Twilight. It almost kind of reinforced some of the criticisms. Because here's this version of Hal went through a lot more than the version of Hal who actually went through Emerald Twilight. Yet he faced it like, and I would argue that he dealt with it better than Kyle did, because Kyle had such a pouty issue over the thought that he might get replaced. And that's nothing compared to what Hal's being.
Poor Kyle. Poor baby Kyle.
But it's interesting to see the differences between the two because they're about the same age and experience level. But Hal benefits by having the Corps behind. So he's so much more focused on doing the job of being a Green Lantern than Kyle does. And it's not Kyle. That's not a knock on Kyle. He doesn't have that structure behind. He doesn't have the benefit of it. So it's kind of really apparent here that, Kyle achieves what he does through his own means. He doesn't have the structure to help him become a hero. Kyle does it because he knows that's what's right.
And I thought he showed a lot of poise, it helped his character building, and it helps, to me, it kind of makes it feel like it helped him solidify his place in Green Lantern history. Which is why he's so popular today.
Very true. Very true. I thought it was such a neat story because you see both of these characters at about the same age. So they're much more relatable than Old Man Hal and young Kyle, you see them together. These guys would be guys that would get along together if they were both in the Corps at the same time, which I think is neat. The odd thing about the story is that Sinestro doesn't remember meeting Kyle when eventually they do meet, and Ganthet doesn't remember meeting Kyle either when he eventually gives Kyle the ring in the alley. Although maybe he does. Maybe that's why he picked Kyle. That could be. And then Kyle doesn't remember anything about meeting Hal or Sinestro when they eventually do meet up. So the story, I'm assuming, is no longer in continuity because there's some gaping plot holes in that regard about that kind of stuff.
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, you don't have John or Guy saying, "Hey, Hal, remember that? You don't remember that time, but remember the time you came back in time and came forward in time and met us in the Warriors Bar." You know, that stuff doesn't happen. So it's not necessarily in continuity anymore, but it's still such a great read because there's some great character moments, and you can really understand why people are fans of both of those characters when you see them side by side, especially when they're both in their early days.
Yep, I agree. I thought it was really well done, and I like this series. I really enjoyed the artwork a lot. I thought the artwork was great. I think it's Paul Pelletier, or I think that's his name.
Yeah, I think he did the art on that issue. The art throughout, like I said, the art throughout this entire series of issues. I thought it was neat that this gave Ron Mars, who was apparently a fan of Hal, gave him a chance to write Hal in his prime.
Yeah, and it was cool to see Hal against Hal. And it's cool to see Hal become Hal and be Hal at the same time in both characters.
Yeah, like I said, it's a little headache inducing, isn't it? But it's a great set of issues. I don't know if you can find them in floppies or not, but like I said, it is still available in trade. But I recommend it. It was a good story. Like I said, it doesn't have a lot of weight and bearing on current continuity, but it was just fun to see. And it was also interesting to see the more brighter, optimistic, Silver Agey character thrown into the extreme '90s era. You know. Yeah,
and I like Carol Ferris. I thought he did really well with her.
Yeah, it was interesting to see them interact. I mean, she throws herself right at him. But good stories.
Great choice, man.
I hope you guys enjoyed our retro.
Look at you go with your Kyle fandom.
All right, everybody, we'll be back in a minute.
This is Robert Vendetti, and you're listening to the podcast of OA.
Hey, Phil, we haven't gotten any listener emails or calls lately, but I happen to be checking our iTunes listing, and we got a couple new reviews, which I thought would be fun to share with people because the iTunes reviews are really important for podcasts because the reviews and the ratings that we get and the number of downloads we get through iTunes elevates where we fall when people search. So like if you search for Green Lantern, you would think that the Lantern Cast and the podcast of O would be the first two things to come up, but it's not necessarily true. Other comic book related podcasts often pop up before ours because they have a larger audience. So anytime anybody goes onto iTunes and leaves us a review, I really appreciate it because it helps the show find a bigger audience. So we've got two recent ones that just got posted this month, so I thought it'd be nice to share them. And obviously, because they're listening to the show, I wanted them to know that we do see them and we do appreciate those reviews, even though they're not something that comes directly to us. The first one comes from Old Fashioned Outlaw. And it says, Myron and Phil make a good team. They bring enthusiasm with a strong knowledge of the Green Lantern universe. I always look forward to listening when I see a new episode of the podcast in my feed. I enjoy hearing their takes and reviews of both current and past Green Lantern issues. I highly recommend this podcast, and Old Fashioned Outlaw gave us 5 stars, so I appreciate that greatly. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's really nice of them to write in like that. That's flattering, because you're the knowledge behind all this. You got a bigger base of knowledge than I do when it comes to Green Lantern stuff. But it's fun having this partnership you and I have. I've had just an amazing time doing it, and it's flattering that he calls us a good team because I really think we are.
I think so too. I appreciate that. I appreciate that somebody took the time out of their day to leave us a review because, like I said, it does help.
And our next one's from Lynn37167. After a 30-year hiatus, I dusted off my comics in 2019 and have been having fun rediscovering old favorites and exploring books I never got into before. Love your podcast and am very much enjoying learning more about the Green Lantern universe. Well, first of all, I appreciate that. It's awesome when you go back and you revisit all this stuff. I know that's one of the benefits of doing the retro reviews that you and I do, because it gives us a chance to go back and see this early stuff that, we fell in love with. And everybody I'm a firm believer that anybody who reads comic books in a certain time frame of their life, there's a certain impact moment to it. And, you've talked a lot about that, Myron, with you and your medical condition. And people find a solace in a certain frame of mind when they're reading comic books. I firmly believe that. And, it can have a lasting impression on you when you go back and reread one that has hit you hard during that time.
It's very true. And I really appreciate when somebody new discovers the show and it adds value to them exploring the Green Lantern universe. To me, that's the greatest thing. One of the things I've come to learn about podcasting over the last 9 years or so is that the content really is, as long as I continue to pay for it to be hosted, the content lives forever, and people are always going to rediscover things. Even now, 9 years later, the first episode that Bill and I recorded is still being downloaded at least once or twice a month. So somebody's going back and discovering the first episodes from way back then, even now. And so, there's great solace in knowing that the work we do and the effort we put into the show, it lives on for as long as I'm alive to host it. But the people will find it and still get value from us talking about the old stuff. I mean, that very first episode was Bill and I trying to make the best out of the Green Lantern movie,
which is hard to do.
At the time, it wasn't too bad because there was just the enthusiasm of seeing Green Lantern on the screen.
Yeah.
We recorded it before the bad reviews really hit and the down talking about it really became a thing. It was still fresh. It was still the number one movie of the week. That kind of thing. That first week was really good, and you were seeing it everywhere, and you were still kind of on that high. So it was a little easier to maintain some positivity. I don't think if I recorded that review now, it would be quite the same. I still have enthusiasm about the movie. I don't know if you saw recently that Ryan Reynolds told a fan not to rent it when he had an opportunity to rent it for 99 cents.
Nice.
And I had to restrain myself because I was going to reply to Ryan Reynolds and say, well, that doesn't the same apply to not renting any Ryan Reynolds movie?
I mean, it takes a golfer. I mean, whatever. He's always, I don't know. He has his beef against it, and and it's an unfair beef because it's like, if you're going to slam the character and slam the movie, you were the one that wanted to take on that role. It wasn't your fault. It was how the movie was done, the writing. There were so many more things that were wrong with that movie than him. But I don't understand what his beef is about taking pot shots at it.
I know. He likes to say that there was no script. Now, if you go back and look at the first draft of the script, it predated the movie for quite a while. So there was a script. It wasn't the finalized script, I'm sure. But while there were problems, I mean, shame on you if you took a job for a movie you didn't have a final script for, and then you wonder why it doesn't come out exactly the same way. I mean, if it wasn't for that movie, you wouldn't have the family you have right now. And go ahead.
No, that's true. I don't like when actors regard that way to a character. It's just unprofessional, and and just because it didn't give up to the standards that you wanted it and you would hope that it was going to do, and propel you into stardom even further, doesn't really give you the right to sit here and trounce on it. I mean, there's a lot more that was at fault with that movie than what you were and what you have to say about it.
Yeah, I kind of wish you would just kind of give it a rest. But anyway. We digress a little bit, thanks to Lynn37167. Again, I appreciate somebody taking time out of their day to leave a comment that really helps the show out. And it's interesting, this person hasn't read books in a 30-year hiatus. So they've got a lot of history. They haven't even read the Jeff Johns run yet. I mean, can you imagine discovering that and being able to read that at any pace you want, because you don't have to wait every month for the issues, to be able to read that run?
I know, it'd be really interesting to be able to relive the moment that you read it for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I envy that person very much to be in that position.
Me too. That's a different kind of feeling that you could reread it 100 times since then, but it'll never reflect what you actually felt the first time you took it in. So enjoy it, Len. Enjoy it.
Yeah, exactly. And we thank both of our listeners for leaving us the reviews. You can go on to YouTube, not YouTube. You can, we have a YouTube channel too, where you can leave comments there. But if you have iTunes and you want to leave us a review, that would be very helpful. If you'd like to contact the show with some listener feedback, either shoot an email to podcast@blogofoa.com, or give us a call on our voice line, which is 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. I think you leave it to a minute of recording time. So, feel free to. We'd love to hear from you and love to hear what you have to say.
This is Salak, Green Lantern of Sector 1418, and you are receiving the podcast of OA.
The podcast of OA.
Well, my friend, that wraps up episode number 63. What do you think, bud?
Good episode. And good retro review. And, just a hats off to all the Kyle Rayner fans out there. I still am. I still like Kyle Rayner. I still dig him as a character. Not as much as Hal, but it's kind of nice revisiting Kyle's era, and it makes me feel like he's more relevant in my mind. I know you're not the biggest fan of Kyle, but it makes me feel his significance as being a part of the Green Lantern Corps.
Well, yeah, I think that was a good story that showcased what was important about both of those characters, or what is important about both, and talk past tense because they're both still here. But I think it really does showcase their greatest strengths and their greatest weaknesses. I thought it was a good, well-written arc. I was saying off mic that when this storyline came out, I had already jumped off. I think I bought maybe the first year of Kyle's run and decided, I gave it my due diligence, and it just wasn't for me, and I walked away. But then when I heard Hal was back for at least an arc, because the rumor was at the time that he was going to come back and stay back, I bought those issues and I thoroughly enjoyed them for the dynamic they had, but I jumped right back off again when everything was done.
You got to do what you got to do, man.
I got to be me.
And that's all we can be. I mean, we all have our likes. We talked about that a lot.
That's right.
And it's fair. It just because we don't like the character doesn't mean that you shouldn't, or that doesn't mean that we're going to trudge on you because you do. Unless you're a fan of Simon Baz.
I was wondering when that was going to get thrown in.
Here's Simon Baz origin story just to get it out of my system.
I think that's the issue you need to review.
Oh, God. All right. You know what? I'll do it. I'll revisit that issue. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'll come up with something that I didn't see before, and I haven't read it since then, and after I remember when I put it down, I was like, "Whoa, here we go." Oh.
See, we talked about recording the podcast was therapy. It's part therapy in more ways than one, right?
It really is. It has you overcome your greatest fear, reading the Simon Baz origin story again.
It's all good fun.
It is. Yeah, I'll happily do that. So if any listeners out there, just be on the lookout, because I'm going to be doing the Simon Baz origin story.
Sounds good. Sounds like a plan. So, next week we will have a new issue of Green Lantern to talk about.
Oh, that's right. We will.
I mean, it'll probably only be a digital version because nobody's going to have the paper copy. But there will be a paper version for us or a digital version for us to talk about.
That's good. At least I can't wait to read it. It's been far too long, and I'm looking forward to delving back into it again.
You're just happy because it's going to give you a week reprieve from reading Simon Baz's origin story. That's what you're...
Well, it's such a, it'll be an easy read. Yeah, I mean, I should be able to, a couple minutes read right before we start the podcast. That'd be good.
All right, everybody. Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the podcast of OA, your now weekly dose of Green Lantern stuff. We enjoy getting together to record it. We hope that this content is enjoyable for you and helps you get through these hard times and gives you something for a little bit of escapism.
Right. Be safe and be well to each other.
Absolutely. Till next time, keep your power rings charged and make every day your brightest day.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the Blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. you can send your emails to podcast@blogofOA.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.